Welcome to Hope Stories, where one stormy night can change everything. Imagine opening your door to a stranger, soaking wet, clutching her unborn child, and behind her eyes a secret so heavy it could shatter both your lives. This isn't just about survival, it's about grief, guilt, and the terrifying courage it takes to trust again when love has already cost you everything. What happens when two broken souls collide in the dark? Can the human heart truly heal? Or will the past always come knocking? Stay with us as we explore a journey filled with haunting memories, moral dilemmas, and a twist that will leave you breathless, leading you into the unforgettable story you're about to hear. The rain had been falling for hours, slicing through the night like icy needles. On the edge of a quiet New England town, a mansion sat in shadow, its windows glowing faintly against the storm. Isabella Moore stood at the wrought iron gate, soaked to the bone, one hand gripping her swollen belly, the other clutching the straps of a battered backpack. At 26, she had already known more loss than most endure in a lifetime. She told herself she was only asking for work, a place to sleep out of the rain. But beneath that, unspoken, was desperation, for safety, for someone to believe she and her unborn child deserved another chance. The mansion belonged to Henry Caldwell, a man whose name still echoed on Wall Street, but whose face had not been seen in public for years. Whispers in town told of a tragic accident that claimed his wife Valerie, and of how the once vibrant magnate locked himself away, turning his sprawling estate into a fortress. When the heavy oak door creaked open, Isabella found herself staring into the lined face of Mrs. Martha Stevens, the housekeeper. Her eyes were sharp with suspicion. Behind her, farther down the hallway, stood Henry. He was tall, his hair streaked with gray, though he was barely 40, his tailored shirt rumpled as if he had been pacing for hours. His eyes, a startling steel blue, held the kind of weariness that comes from battles fought behind closed doors. "Please," Isabella said, her voice trembling under the weight of rain and pride. "I can work for food, just somewhere dry." Martha's mouth tightened. "Mr. Caldwell doesn't take in strangers." But Henry's gaze lingered on Isabella's trembling shoulders and the defiant tilt of her chin. He saw something raw and unsettling there, a mirror of his own private despair. Against his better judgment, he told Martha to let her in. That single choice cracked open the walls he'd spent 5 years building. From the first night, the house seemed to bristle at Isabella's presence. Martha made no effort to hide her mistrust, and Henry's own control teetered. He lived by rituals, checking every lock 17 times, arranging books and cutlery with mathematical precision. Isabella woke one night to the sound of footsteps and drawers slamming, only to find Henry in the corridor, muttering numbers under his breath, his palms raw from washing. When she stepped closer, she saw tears on his face as he pressed his forehead to a locked door. "Valerie, I'm sorry," he whispered, a confession torn from someplace deep and jagged. In that moment, Isabella understood. His grief wasn't just mourning, it was guilt. But what could a broken man offer a woman already drowning in her own secrets? What neither Henry nor Martha knew was that Isabella wasn't only running from poverty. There were bruises beneath her sweater, memories of nights when doors slammed and fists flew. The father of her child had promised forever. He delivered terror. She hadn't spoken of it aloud, not yet, but trauma recognizes its own. Perhaps that was why Henry's gaze lingered too long, or why Martha, despite her mistrust, began leaving tea outside Isabella's door. Days blurred. Henry arranged for medical care, his wealth smoothing the path, while Isabella learned his patterns, careful never to move an object out of place. A fragile trust began to grow, brittle but real. And yet the closer they drew, the more the house seemed haunted by Valerie's absence. At night, Henry dreamed of the crash, but one storm-soaked dawn, he woke screaming a different name, Isabella's. He told no one. One evening, as the fire cast trembling shadows, Henry finally confessed his obsessive routines, his nightmares, the medication that had dulled him into a ghost. "If you stay," he said, his voice rough, "you need to know what living with me really means. I'm not the man people remember. I'm not sure I know how to be." Isabella, hands folded over her belly, looked at him with a steadiness that made his chest ache. "No one is normal, Henry. We all find ways to survive the pain." He almost believed her, until the night the past came crashing through the door. It was just past midnight when the alarm blared. Isabella woke to voices, one of them low and menacing, coming from the foyer. Henry reached the stairs first, and what he saw turned his blood to ice. A man from Isabella's past, rain-slick and furious, demanding she come home with him. In that charged instant, Henry's carefully controlled world exploded. He wasn't a recluse anymore. He was a man with something to protect. What happened next would test the limits of his fragile sanity and the price both of them were willing to pay for freedom. Would you have opened the door to a desperate stranger on a stormy night? Can a heart shattered by grief ever truly love again? And as the intruder's shadow stretched across the hall, none of them knew that the darkest secret of the Caldwell mansion was about to be revealed. Henry's hand tightened on the banister as the storm outside howled like some omen. The man standing in the foyer was drenched, his eyes bloodshot, his presence filling the house with a rage that felt feral. Isabella froze halfway down the stairs, one hand instinctively on her belly, the other trembling on the railing. "You thought you could run from me?" the stranger spat, his voice low but razor sharp. Lightning illuminated his face, and Henry saw the bruised knuckles, the wildness of someone who had nothing to lose. In that split second, Henry understood. This wasn't just an intruder. This was the ghost from Isabella's nightmares, made flesh and fury. Something inside Henry, long dormant, sparked. His rituals, his routines, his carefully controlled world. All of it meant nothing if he couldn't protect her now. Yet beneath the surge of adrenaline, terror clawed at him. His mind screamed of loss, of Valerie, of how love always ended in blood. Isabella's voice cut through the charged air, shaky but firm. "Please, don't do this. Just go." The man's gaze flicked to Henry, contempt curling his lips. "Who the hell is he? Your new savior?" He stepped closer, and Henry's breath caught. The scent of whiskey, the threat in his stance, triggered something deep and primal. Memories of the night of Valerie's crash clawed up, how he'd been too late, too weak to change fate. Was he about to fail again? The internal war nearly paralyzed him, but then Isabella whispered, "Henry," with a tremor that carried all her trust and fear. That single syllable broke whatever chains held him. "You need to leave," Henry said, his voice low but steady, surprising even himself. "This house is safe. You won't hurt her again." The man laughed, a harsh, barking sound, and pulled something from his coat, just a glint of metal in the dark. Henry's heart slammed against his ribs. He'd counted locks, washed hands raw, whispered apologies to a locked door for 5 years, but none of it prepared him for this moment. And yet he stepped between Isabella and the threat, his own shaking hands raised in a gesture of warning. Martha appeared at the hallway's edge, her face pale but resolute, clutching the old hunting rifle Henry's father once kept for show. The tension coiled tighter, like the house itself was holding its breath. Isabella's abuser smirked, eyes darting between them. "You think you can save her? She's mine." His words were venom, but underneath Henry caught something unexpected. Fear. The man's hands trembled almost as much as his own. A sickening thought pierced Henry's mind. Was he seeing a reflection of himself? A man so consumed by pain and control he'd forgotten how to love without harm? The moral weight crushed him, the world narrowed to Isabella's uneven breaths, the storm's roar, the steady aim of Martha's trembling arms. "No one owns her," Henry said finally, and his voice was no longer shaky. It carried the weight of his grief and a defiance he thought he'd buried with Valerie. The stranger's face shifted, rage faltering into confusion, then something that looked almost like shame. He lowered the glint of metal. It was only a set of keys. The threat had been more bluster than intent, but the danger was real enough. Martha didn't lower the rifle. Isabella took a step forward, voice breaking. "I'm not coming back with you. You can't scare me anymore." Her courage stunned even herself. For Henry, it was a revelation. This young woman, battered by life, still had more courage than he ever believed he could muster. The man swore under his breath, his shoulders sagging under some unseen weight, and bolted out into the storm. The slam of the door left a silence so deep Henry felt dizzy. His knees buckled, the panic and adrenaline poured out of him in a shudder. Isabella knelt beside him, hand on his face. In her eyes he saw not pity, but understanding. For the first time, Henry allowed himself to believe that maybe love didn't always end in loss. Maybe protecting someone could be his salvation as much as hers. Upstairs, the locked music room door stood silent, but behind it something in Henry's heart had shifted. The ghosts of Valerie's memory didn't feel quite as condemning. He had faced the storm, inside and out, and survived. But storms leave wreckage, and both of them knew this wasn't over. How would you have faced someone who embodied all your deepest fears and failures? As the echoes of the slammed door faded, none of them realized that the most dangerous secrets of the Caldwell estate had yet to surface, waiting for the moment they'd hurt the most. The storm passed by morning, but the house remained charged with an uneasy energy, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the chaos from the night before. Henry had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the man's face, the glint of metal, Isabella's terrified but defiant stance. Downstairs over coffee, Martha moved silently, her usual bluntness muted into something almost gentle. Isabella sat across from Henry, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. There was relief that her abuser was gone, but also a heaviness, an unspoken fear that his return was inevitable. "You didn't have to protect me like that," she said softly, breaking the fragile quiet. Henry looked up. The exhaustion in his eyes made him seem older, but there was a strange light there too. "I did. Not just for you, for me." It startled him how true those words felt. For years, his life had been about controlling loss, building walls against chaos. Last night, he had stepped into chaos willingly, and some part of him felt alive for the first time since Valerie died. Yet with that awakening came a wave of guilt so strong it made him dizzy. Upstairs, behind that locked music room door, lingered Valerie's memory, and Henry could almost hear her voice. "You're moving on without me." It was irrational, but grief doesn't play fair. His heart twisted with conflict. Could he love someone new without betraying the woman he lost? And what if protecting Isabella wasn't love, but just another attempt to fix the unfixable? Isabella sensed his turmoil. "Henry," she said hesitantly, "there's something I need to tell you. About that night I showed up here." Her voice faltered as she revealed what she had kept hidden. She hadn't just been running from an abusive partner. There had been a fight, shouting, something breaking. She'd shoved him to get away, and he'd fallen. She fled before she knew if he was badly hurt. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "I don't even know if the police are looking for me," she whispered. "I was so scared for my baby, for myself." The confession hit Henry like a blow, not because he saw her as guilty, but because of the raw shame in her voice. He felt the ground shift. Last night's intruder hadn't just been a tormentor. He might have been a victim, too. The moral lines blurred until Henry couldn't see where right ended and wrong began. Martha set down her cup with a thud. "If the police come, they'll ask questions," she said. Her tone was not accusatory, but practical, protective. Henry's mind whirred. For years his wealth had shielded him from the world, but it couldn't shield Isabella or her unborn child. Did he hide her? Did he call a lawyer? Did he risk his fragile recovery by inviting more chaos into their lives? The claustrophobic tension settled over the kitchen like a fog. Isabella's eyes searched his face for judgment, for disgust, but found neither. Instead, Henry felt the unexpected rise of something else: admiration. She had survived violence, terror, and now confessed her darkest truth, knowing it might make him turn her out. "You're safe here," he said finally, his voice steady. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it. But you have to be honest with me about everything." Her nod was small, but her relief was palpable. Still, deep inside, Henry knew this confession changed everything. The man from last night might come back. The law might come knocking. And worst of all, his own heart was no longer numb. It wanted, it feared, it ached. The ghosts in the music room were stirring, whispering that love and loss were two sides of the same coin, and he was about to gamble both. Do you believe Henry should protect Isabella at all costs, even if it means breaking the law? Or should he face the truth, no matter how painful? As the first rays of sun broke over Caldwell Mansion, none of them realized that the next knock on the door would shatter whatever fragile peace they had left. The knock came just after noon, 3 deliberate raps that seemed to echo through every corner of the Caldwell Mansion. Henry felt his chest tighten as if the air had been sucked from the room. Martha froze in the doorway, her face paling, while Isabella instinctively wrapped her arms around her belly. Through the leaded glass of the front door, a silhouette stood, upright, composed, official. When Henry opened it, two figures waited, a police detective in a charcoal suit and a woman in a neat blazer holding a folder tight against her chest. "Mr. Caldwell, Detective Harris, this is Child Protective Services. We need to speak with you and Ms. Moore," the detective said with measured politeness. For a moment, Henry could only hear the blood roaring in his ears. Isabella's confession still hung between them like a fragile thread, and now this. "Isabella Moore is staying here." "Yes," Henry managed. "What is this about?" The CPS worker's eyes softened, but her tone remained professional. "We received a report of a domestic incident. We need to ensure Miss Moore and her unborn child are safe and that any potential victims are accounted for." Henry's stomach dropped. Somehow, the outside world had found them. Isabella stepped forward, her face pale but her voice steady. "I left him because he hurt me. I don't even know if I never meant." She broke off, the weight of her own uncertainty crushing her. Detective Harris studied her, then Henry, taking in the lavish but shuttered house, the older housekeeper hovering protectively. "Mr. Caldwell, are you aware your guest might be wanted for questioning in connection to an assault? The man claims he was injured when she fled." The room seemed to tilt. Henry's first impulse was to deny, to shield Isabella completely. But a deeper, more troubling question gnawed at him. What if she really had hurt the man? What if, in his desperation to protect her, he was repeating the same blind spots that haunted him after Valerie's death? He had ignored warning signs once. Could he afford to do it again? Isabella's eyes brimmed with tears, but she didn't look away. "I pushed him. He fell. I didn't check if he was hurt because I was scared. That's the truth." There it was, unvarnished, messy, human. Detective Harris nodded slowly. "Thank you for your honesty. We're not here to arrest you today. We need a statement and to ensure your safety." But Henry felt the unspoken threat in the room. This wasn't over. The law could take her away. CPS could take her child if they deemed her unfit. And beneath all that loomed his own terror, that getting attached meant losing again. After they left, leaving a card and a summons for an interview, the house felt heavier. Isabella sat on the edge of the sofa, silent tears streaking her face. Henry stood by the window, staring at the storm-dark sky even though the sun had broken hours ago. Inside, a different storm raged. Was protecting her truly an act of love, or an attempt to rewrite his own tragedy with Valerie? If he helped her evade the consequences, was he saving her or destroying them both? Martha, uncharacteristically gentle, laid a hand on his shoulder. "You can't control the world, Henry. Not with locks or routines or secrets. You have to decide what kind of man you want to be now." Her words cut through him. Valerie's ghost seemed to linger in the locked music room upstairs, waiting for his answer too. And as Isabella looked up at him, eyes full of fear and hope, Henry realized the choice before him wasn't just legal, it was moral. Love, redemption, grief, guilt, all of it tangled, pulling him in opposite directions. If you were in Henry's place, would you risk everything to protect Isabella or let the truth take its course, no matter the cost? That evening, as thunder rolled again in the distance, none of them knew that the next secret to emerge from the Caldwell mansion would shake the foundation of everything they thought they knew about love and loss. Night draped over the Caldwell estate like a velvet shroud, and yet no one slept. Henry paced the hallway outside the locked music room, the same door he'd pressed his forehead against during his darkest hours. Isabella lay awake downstairs on the sofa, one hand curled protectively over her belly, the detective's card still on the table like an accusation. Martha sat silently knitting in her chair, but even her needles moved slower than usual, the tension in the house palpable. Henry's mind churned with memories and a gnawing dread. Valerie's ghost hovered everywhere, her laughter in the walls, her song trapped behind that door, and for the first time he wondered if what happened to her had really been the accident everyone claimed. He had never shared with anyone the doubt that sometimes clawed its way into his dreams. The late-night phone calls, her frightened eyes the week before the crash, the way she had been desperate to tell him something, but never got the chance. Now, with Isabella's confession and the law closing in, those questions screamed louder. What if the past wasn't buried, And what if protecting Isabella meant earthing truths about Valerie that could break him all over again? As if in answer, a sound shattered the silence, a metallic click from the music room. Henry froze. That door had been locked for 5 years. He turned the handle with trembling hands. To his shock, it gave way. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memory. Valerie's grand piano sat under a sheet, photographs lined the mantel, and on the desk lay an envelope yellowed with age, addressed to Henry in Valerie's handwriting. His heart pounded as he tore it open. The letter inside was brief, scrawled in urgency. It spoke of fear, someone following her, strange threats, and one chilling line: "If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident." Henry's knees buckled. The world tilted. Valerie had known. She had tried to warn him, and he hadn't listened. The grief he'd carried all these years now twisted into something sharper, guilt edged with suspicion. Who had threatened her? Was it connected to her death? And why did the handwriting at the bottom look rushed, almost as if someone else had touched the pen? Isabella appeared in the doorway, drawn by the noise. She saw him clutching the letter, his face ashen. "What is it?" she asked, voice trembling. Henry couldn't speak for a moment. When he did, his voice was raw. She was afraid before she died. She thought someone wanted to hurt her. The words hung heavy between them, opening a chasm of new questions. Isabella stepped closer, hesitated, then placed a hand on his arm. "Henry, what if the truth helps you forgive yourself? What if protecting me also means facing what really happened to her?" Her question cut deep because it echoed the thought he feared most. Facing the truth might set him free, or it might destroy what little peace he had rebuilt. Outside, the wind picked up again, branches scraping against the windows like fingernails. Inside, Henry felt the first flicker of resolve. Perhaps the ghosts he feared weren't behind locked doors, but in the secrets he refused to confront. And now, with Isabella and her unborn child depending on him, he wasn't sure he could keep running from the past any longer. If you discovered a hidden message from someone you loved, hinting their death wasn't an accident, would you risk everything to uncover the truth, or protect yourself from more pain? As Henry clutched Valerie's letter with shaking hands, none of them knew that the storm the letter would unleash would be far more devastating than the one outside their walls. Henry sat alone in the music room as dawn broke, Valerie's letter lying open on the piano. The words blurred with his tears, but the meaning remained seared into his mind. For years, he had built his life around guilt and rituals, convinced he had failed the woman he loved most. Now he knew she had carried her own fear, her own secrets, and had tried to protect him, even as danger closed in. The sound of soft footsteps pulled him back. Isabella stood in the doorway, pale in the morning light, her hands resting on her belly. There was no fear in her eyes now, only quiet strength. "You've been up all night," she said gently. Henry gave a weak laugh. "I've been up for 5 years. He hesitated, then held out the letter. "She knew something. She was trying to tell me, but I didn't listen. I don't know if I can live with that." Isabella read the note silently, her brow furrowing, but when she looked up, her gaze was steady. "Henry, you've been punishing yourself for so long. You can't change the past, but you can choose what to do with the truth now." Her words were simple, yet they pierced through the storm of his thoughts. The day moved slowly. Detective Harris returned later with news. Valerie's car had been tampered with. The case had been reopened quietly. An old business rival, long suspected but never charged, had left town shortly after her death. The revelation struck Henry like a blow and a balm at once. His failure wasn't the whole story. Someone else had carried the darkness. That night, Henry walked the halls of the mansion differently. The ghosts still lingered, but they felt less like judges and more like witnesses. He found Isabella on the porch, staring at the stars, and for a moment he saw not a stranger who had knocked on his door in desperation, but the person who had breathed life back into his hollow world. "I don't know what the police will find," he admitted, "but I want you to stay. Not because I pity you, because you've taught me that love isn't about control, it's about courage." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what my future looks like either. I just know I'm not afraid anymore, and that's because of you." The months that followed weren't easy. There were interviews, court hearings, and nights when Henry still woke gasping from old nightmares. Isabella testified with honesty. The law saw her truth, not just her mistakes. The man who hurt her disappeared from their lives. Valerie's case slowly revealed its buried answers, enough to lay some of the ghosts to rest. One crisp winter morning, Isabella gave birth in a quiet hospital room. Henry held the tiny infant, his heart swelling with a love so raw it terrified him. He thought of Valerie and whispered a promise in his heart. He would not waste the life she had lost or the second chance that had found him. Years later, the mansion no longer felt like a tomb. Laughter echoed in its halls again. Martha still clicked her tongue and fussed over the child who ran through the corridors, and Henry still lined up the books on the shelf, but the rituals no longer ruled him. They were just part of who he was, like his scars, like his love. One spring evening, Henry unlocked the music room for good. He sat at Valerie's piano with Isabella beside him and their child asleep upstairs. His fingers stumbled over the keys, the melody rusty, but his heart felt light. "Do you think she'd forgive me?" he asked quietly. Isabella rested her head on his shoulder. "I think she already has. The only one left to forgive you is you." Henry closed his eyes and let the music carry his grief and his hope into the night. Life would never be perfect. Love would always carry the risk of loss. But as the stars shone through the window and Isabella's hand found his, Henry finally understood that love's fragility made it all the more precious. He had opened the door once to a stranger in the rain, and in doing so had opened the door to living again. The mansion stood as it always had, but inside, everything had changed. What are your thoughts on Henry and Isabella's journey and the way their story ended? Comment 100 if you enjoyed this story. Which country are you watching from? Share this video with your friends, and thank you for watching Hope Stories.